Welcome back, everybody. Well, it's been a little while since I've been on YouTube, but I'm back. But hey, in this one, I'm gonna show you how I built this porch. I'd never built one before, but I have now. These pilot forks would be aggravating to slide. One thing I found that helps, lean them forward a little bit and it takes some of the weight off of it and you can slide them a lot easier. All right, I got the porch building buggy loaded. Let's go get to work. Should have cut this on the ground. All right, I got the front side ledger on. We'll move to the left-hand side. Hopefully I can get this miter to work out and get it trimmed out neat here on the side. Run it, then we'll go to the other side and finish it up. All right, we're on the last side. I've set up the little laser level so we can put us some blocks out through here. I got my right-hand man driver with me. Hey, pull us on up there, driver. You have to hit that button over on the right and don't hit that sewer clean out in that hose bib. A little more. Good. Hand me a block there, driver. Reed, this little laser level is the trick. Easy there, killer. Good, good. The thread starts start now. Yeah, you got it. Watch it come out now. What it does, it gets down in there, and that thread, it strips it. You drove it in far enough now to where the threads will catch.
I like hammering. It's my favorite thing to do when I work.
Everybody needs to know how to drive a nail. Hey, you can't peck at it, you gotta hit it. Just not with my fingers right there next to it. Alright, so what I've done is my front one where it came around the corner, I've got it mitered. And then I got my block tipped up here where it wouldn't hold me up, but I've just lined my line up, centered it up on the corner. I've got my blocks nailed, screwed down through there, so we can just, as we're working our way down, set them on the blocks. Screw them off. It's little things of winter. Next up, I've got to set my corners where they tie back in the house. So this roof rafters will come out and then we'll 90-degree back in the house. I didn't want my overhangs going past the corner, so I'll have a hip here that'll come off at a 45-degree angle. When I set these headers in there, I just threw a block up over here, but they're not plumb, so I've got to raise them up and get these plumb, or level rather, and then I got to make sure that that's a true 90-degree corner. And I went ahead and added blocking back in the framing, so when I got ready to anchor these, I'd have something solid behind the wall. So I'll get it squared, get it level, and we'll anchor that baby to the house. We'll be ready to move on to the other side. All right, I'm planning as I go here, but I went ahead and cut a template for my rafters, and so I've run it all the way around the house, and I'm within a quarter on it coming up here and meeting flush all the way around. So I've established my rafter seat. It's setting nice on the header, and so this is going to be seen, so this will all be visible, and it's, you know, wood. It's going to be for decoration. So I want this to lay up here on this solid, and I want a good clean edge here to where they meet up. Now I was going to take a router and route a seat for all these to set and lock in. I'm tired of fooling with it, so I ain't doing that. So what I'm going to do is build me a scribe on the end of my template. That way I can adjust that end, screw it off, then I can take it over and scribe it on my material, cut it, and it should fit. So I cut my template, I cut it off about a 1/2 inch, so I make sure that it clears everywhere, and I'll show you what I'm going to do. Okay, a rafter seat setting good and snug and tight. That's a good joint. And so I've put a stop up here on the top so it keeps me on plane. So then when I've got, I was gonna put me some notches in this to where I could just slide this and wing nut it down, but I ain't got time to fool that either. So what I'm gonna do is I've got this little block that I'll bring in here. I'll find that exact angle, and then I'll screw it off, and then when I take it over there, it'll give me the exact angle that I need to where when I screw that up, it should be nice and tight. Now one other thing that I did calculate, and I hope I've calculated it right, is I figured out where these rafters are going to hit and how they're going to tie into my hips on the ends. Now the way it works out now is with, if I start in the center, I'm going to have a full one right before my hip, and then should have a long one hit back right in the center. Now I am going to have a little short one down on the end, but I didn't want a short one up at the top, so it's give or take. I could scoot them one way or the other, I guess, and make it work and have two 2-foot ones, but I'm gonna run with this. We'll see how it works out. If it's short on that little hip, it'll just be short. But anyway, scribe one, let's go over and cut it. I think I've got this figured out, but cutting them rafter seats in these 4x6s is gonna be a little challenging, but we'll figure that out. Well, I'm gonna call that a day. That's got the front done, and then tomorrow I've got to set one more header, and then I'll build my hips, and then I'll be able to take off down the sides. But I'll tell you, that little template, that jig, is working really well. Get you tight on your rafter tails. Your seats are all sitting in there nice, and then getting a real tight joint up there at the ledger board. So pleased with the way that's working. Well, I've got two of my hip rafters up, one on the corner and then one back here on the back side. This is where the roof will come around and then return back into the house. I'll go over here and mark out the third corner, try to get those last two done, and then we'll go back to putting the rafters in here. It should go a little quicker. Cutting these hips on that big of material with the tools I've got is a pain in the rear. Tell you, this little template has came in pretty handy. I've got this porch, I mean, it's pretty square, and so everything is pretty close to the same all the way around, but when you're looking at 150 feet, Not everything's gonna be perfect. With this little jig, I can get it exactly what it needs to be. Alright, let's go cut it. Alright, here's the way I've got my template laid out. I didn't have anything thin that was as wide as what my beams are. So in this case, I just measured these as your 8, so I added me a strip on here. That way I could bring it up here and line it up level with the top. Some's going to be in and out. If you'll notice this one, it's probably 8 1/4. I'm not worried about the bottom side. I want the top to be right. So my rafter seat, if it has to step up in 1/4 more, that's okay. But my top will be level. That way when my roof deck goes on, it'll be flush and level. So anyway, got the top lined up. I'll get a mark here. That'll be my ledger board cut. And then back here, I got to cut angles to where it'll go around my corner. Let's have some fun. Come on. All right, that'll go up against the ledger. Meet around my corner. So everything I lay out from now, though, I have to lay out from this point, because that's the point where my ledger will hit. So when I set my jig up here to cut my rafter seat, I'll have to line it up with this point and let it run back, and then that'll give me the right distance. Now this is where it gets remarkably fun. I don't want to put too many lines on here because I'll have to offset them. So I'm just going to get me a few little reference marks in the corners, because I'll be coming back and remarking them. Now here's what I'm dealing with. So here's my rafter seat, and so I've got to go across that corner. So this line here is squared up. So if you think, I've got my corner down there, so I'll have a tip coming back here. So I'll have to find this line, 45 it here, 45 it there. That way that material can step back in it. And then over here on this side, I've got the corner, and so I will have to, corners sticking out, I have to come in here and I'll have to take this material out, leave this corner, that way it can fit back. My inside corner will go back in it. So a little math. The math's done though, just making sure I mark on the right side of the line. This is what happens when you ain't paying attention. You mark where you're not supposed to. Anybody know how to get pencil mark off of that beam? I'd appreciate it. Alright, there's my notch. Got it slicked up pretty good. For you timber framers, that's probably a little rough, but for old hack like me, I can live with it. I'm gonna wait on my rafter tail. Once I get all my rafters put up, I'll flip me a line across the top of that and I'll cut my rafter tail off. But there's my seat cut. Here's my ledger cut. Let's go see if it fits. I think we can live with that. All right, that worked out pretty good. Joint looks pretty good. I can live with that. I'll take that little hand plane and I'll come through here and knock this corner off. That way when my roof decking comes in here, it won't be riding up on that edge. So I'll knock that corner off. Rafter seat looks pretty good. I'll consider this one a win. All right, I'm on my last hip, so I've got to tie back into my ledger. So I've got a mark up here the same as the distance from here to there, and so I've went ahead and cut my ledger board. I've got my rafter seat cut and I notched it out so it'll go around my plate. What I'll do is I'll bring it up here, line it up with my 8-foot mark, and I'll go ahead and get a mark, and that way I can marry them up, because I've got a notch in this to where my siding will slide up under it. So I want the bottom of this ledger to be level with the bottom of this ledger. That way my siding will go up in there neat. So I'll stick it up there, we'll get some mark and cut it off, and then we'll be ready to cut this last hip. And then it ought to have the hard stuff behind us. Tell you what, that ain't too bad for a free-handed skill saw. Now I used a miter saw and flipped it over. Give me a little better cut. So now I'll come over here off my center line. That's where I'll set my template, mark that rafter seat out, and try to get it cut. For those who might be following along, where I cut my ledger over there and it's at that peak, I've got it set up to where it'd be the center of my beam. So I come over 2 inches and got my center mark, and then squared the line over, so that's where the end of my template will be. It'll give me a reference mark to put my seat cut in the right place. Well, this is the last of the Mohicans on the straight ones. Then I'll have to start running my little, whatever you call them, jacks or whatever they are. I'll have to cut a 45 here and tie them back in. I'll get a couple here on this hip. I'll go cut this one. Like I say, this is my last straight one. And we'll move on to the fun ones. Be nice to have a bigger saw. But I'll tell you, this little template has been a lifesaver, because I don't care what it is. If it's wood, it ain't gonna be perfect. And so, you know, if you got a 2x4 in here that's bowed out just a little bit, or in, or whatever it may be, with this, I've been able to describe them. And for the most part down through there, I've been able to get them pretty tight. Let's go cut the last one. Go see if she'll fit. Let's see if it fits. Oh baby, we all like it. Fit in there nicely. Got a good seat on my rafter. Let's move to the corners. For anybody wondering, I got about a 1/16 inch gap over there on that right hand side. I need to improve on that a little. All right, moving on to my, I'm assuming these are jack rafters. Correct me in the comments. But to find my 4-foot up here on where 4-foot center will meet, I just took my 4-foot drywall square, run it over here to where it bumped, and then I've already got my line down there. Then I took that, I cut my template off about 1 inch shorter than what that will be. I'll take my little gauge block, take it up there and bump it. We'll go over and cut it. Now what I've done is I'm cutting my longest hip or jack rafters, whatever it may be, on this corner and then the other corner, and then down here on this end they'll be shorter. So as I progress through getting them cut, I'll keep cutting this off. That way my rafter tail stays consistent and everything should work out the same. I believe we can live with that, folks. Well, it pulled over my line just a little bit, but I think we can live with it. All right, I've got about 8 or 9 more of these to go, and we'll be ready to put a top on this thing. All right, I've got all my framework in place all the way around. Everything's secured, screwed off. Now I'm going in here and adding some L brackets. I had the same fabricator that made my headers and posts to bend me some brackets, and they've drilled me a 1/2 inch hole, and then I've got 2 anchoring holes here on the sides. But I want to get this tied down, that way these rafter ends are secured out here. But I'm going to be putting a tongue and groove ceiling, as I've probably said before, and one man trying to put tongue and groove ceiling on this porch, I just don't have the time. So the guys that framed the house for me, they're going to come up hopefully this week and nail this ceiling on for me, or roof deck essentially, which will be exposed from the underside. But what I'm wanting to do is go ahead, I've got all my rafters marked here on 4-foot center, so I'll pull them to my line, anchor them down. Should keep this thing from blowing away. Well, here's the finished product. Glad to have it finished. That jig that I used to cut my rafters, it worked out really well. I was able to get a good tight cut. All my seat cuts out here and all my rafter tails worked out good and straight, so everything was consistent. But I had 2 jigs. I had one for just the straight rafters, and then I had one for the hip, so that's obviously cut on a 12-17 run versus a 12-12. But where I cut these little corners, I took my standard rafter, and then as I come to here, I cut the longest pieces first, and then I cut it down to where it worked for those, and that way that rafter tail worked out consistent. But that was the game changer on being able to get everything cut nice and tight. That little scissor lift that I had with me doing it by myself, man, I was up and down a lot, and having that thing to, you know, to pick these up there and have something to stand on, hold your tools. If I'd tried to done that on a ladder, I could have done it, but it would have been a pain in the rear. But I ended up putting a 2x8 fascia on it, and then I've done all of my trim, fascia trim and everything in 24 gauge metal. That way it's a little stiffer and it didn't oil can. But basically I just dropped it under to the bottom side, and then I just brought a 1-inch lip up there. That way I could keep that wood look, but that caps everything off nice. So it turned out pretty neat. For those who are wondering, I'll show my work off here. Just noticed I got to put a bolt in that one. Those hips were interesting cuts, but they turned out pretty good. I'll walk you around, but this is the finished product. I'm glad to have this behind me. This was probably my last big project, you know, tackling it by myself, but I'm glad to have it over with. Now the title of this video is I saved myself 20,000 bucks and did it myself. Well, I got a bid to, I had all the lumber, I had all the material, and I had a guy quote me $22,000 to basically cut the rafters, attach them, and then put the ceiling on it, or the roof deck if you want to call it, and then add the fascia. And I just thought that was I thought it was a big number. Maybe it's not, but I was like, you know what, I'm not gonna pay this guy $22,000, because the thing I run into is you pay somebody $22,000, and with their joints being as tight as those, I don't know, maybe they would have, but this seems like you pay big money sometimes and it's still a half, you know what, job. So anyway, it cost me $2,000 for my framer to come nail the roof deck on this thing. So basically, if he's willing to do that for $2 grand, that guy was going to charge me 20,000 bucks to put these rafters on. So anyway, I done it myself. I timed myself, and this is not exact, but I worked on this about 40 hours. Obviously, I didn't do it all in one day and consecutive days, but over a couple week period, I had about 40 hours in it. So I'd go work 40 hours for 20 grand. I'd had in my mind I would have paid $10,000 to $12,000 to got it done, and maybe I'm too low, but if I can do it by myself in 40 hours, I think a crew could have come in here and done it quite a bit quicker, and there was still quite a bit of profit to be made on this job, which I kept in my pocket. So hey, I'm glad I did it. It was a challenge. I was ready to be finished with it, but I'm glad I did it. It was fun. So first porch I've ever built, but this probably wasn't the best one to start on, but those jigs and fixtures made a world of difference. Now, it's been a few months since I've been on YouTube with a long form video, but we went on a little skiing trip for the kids' spring break, and my wife blew out her ACL, so that just complicated life. So we was trying to get this done, still work and take care of her and run kids and run a taxi service. So YouTube had to take a back seat, but obviously things have changed a little bit since then. The guys who put my standing seam roof on, they finished the porch for me. They built, covered the shed back there for me in the back, and then I was able to get them to put my siding on. So they put a board and batten metal siding on for me. So it turned out that I'm pretty pleased with that, but I still like, you know, a bunch of stuff to get done. But the next project I've got to finish is I've got to trim out my windows and doors. I'm going to use a popper's 2x6, 2x8 material to do that. I went ahead and I've got that window up there. I got it framed out. I've got to go back and touch up my plugs where I screwed it together, but that's what it's going to look like. But once I get that done, that'll pretty much have the outside buttoned up. But I'm going to do all my exterior corners, all my windows and doors, and then I'm going to do my garage doors out of that as well. I don't know if it'll show up well with the lighting, but that's what the shed ended up turning out. Built some little end walls out here on the end, and then I went ahead and continued that board and batten siding out there to close it up. I wasn't going to go inside on the end walls and put anything, but I've got some of that board and batten siding, so I'll probably come in my end walls and down the front side of my header or the back side of my header, and probably go ahead and wrap that in metal as well. That way it'll clean it up a little bit. But I ended up just putting a rib metal on the roof for that, since it's just a open shed. Now I've got to come back in here and stain and seal all of my concrete. Obviously I did the border in certain areas, so we'll put some color on that, and then I'm gonna put a light color on this, but we got to get everything sealed. And then I ended up using a rubber mulch here in my beds coming up the breezeway, but I've got French drains underneath both of these beds, so they're rocking underneath it, so I wasn't going to plant anything in there. So we'll build some planters in here and try to get everything snazzed up in time. I am not going to sow any grass until the fall, so that's the reason it looks like a jungle around here. But I've got to get topsoil and come in here and get the yard fixed. But hopefully September and October we can get this place landscaped and get a little grass on and make it look a little better. Well, I've rambled on long enough, but anyway, I'm glad to get the porch done. I'm glad to save 20 grand. And hey, if an old hillbilly like me can do it, you can too. So I'll be glad to get everything done. But you know how it is when you move in a house, you sort of, you know, it's a grind to get to that move-in date, and then it sort of starts taking a back burner. So Travis is going to have to get focused here on a checklist and get this stuff knocked out and get it finished up. But I'm going to bring you along for some of the projects. We got to build some tables and different things inside, and we got a lot more to go. But hey, we're closer to the end than we are the beginning, so I'm glad I can at least say that. But if you watch this one, I appreciate it, and we'll catch you on the next one.